I'm RANAJOY. Today in this video I'm going to talk about the history of Russia, or the history of the largest country of the world currently, the Russian Federation. It's its actual name. So how did Russia originate, or where did it originate? Well, Russia's history actually starts from the Eastern Slavic people, which is actually today just located in the Balkans, which is basically just southeastern Europe, or basically Russia originates from the Eastern Slavic people, or people which are now currently in the Balkans, and the most of which is from Slovakia or Slovenia, and they originated from the people of East Slavic. They originated from the the East Slavic people, and it starts from the Eastern and Slavic people to the rise of Kievan Rus. And I didn't know Kievan Rus was actually an empire back then, and they controlled about half of European Russia currently. It kind of looked like that. So it started from the East Slavic peoples to the rise of Kievan Rus, which is basically an empire and from the olden days, Mongol invasions, or also when the Mongol Empire, the Mongol Empire is the second largest empire in the world that has ever existed. It originated from the early 1200s, and then first started in China, and then slowly started expanding into Russia and even South Asia, and even reached all the way to Europe. So it also experienced the Mongol invasions. They were invaded by the Mongol people, and also the Tsardom, or when the Tsar came to rule Russia, and also the Russian Empire, which existed during the Industrial Revolution, the Soviet Union, or when the Bolsheviks revolted against the Russian Empire, and gradually they took control of it, and then they named it to the Soviet Union, and then to the modern Russian Federation that we know today, or the modern Russia that we know today. Here is just a drawing of it. So this is just a drawing of Russia, as you can see. So this is what basically Russia looks like. Apparently, it is the largest country in the world that everybody knows, and it has a very big history. So the territory was settled by East Slavs and later mixed with Varangians, forming the Kievan Rus. Like I said, they were first settled by the East Slavs, which came from southeastern Europe and actually came to the European Russia, and then actually mixed with the Varangians, or actually mixed with the Varangian people, and then ultimately formed the Kievan Rus. Okay, this is not Kievan Rus. It was actually very different. And if we just go forward a few centuries, then we will encounter the Russian Empire and also its Tsar, or they believed in Tsardom, which means that they will elect a Tsar to be their ruler. And in 1917, the Soviets took control of the Russian Empire by revolting against them, and it's also led by Vladimir Lenin, or it was led by Vladimir Lenin, and then formed the Soviet Union, and then it existed throughout World War I, or actually a part of World War I, and fought in World War II, and then it collapsed in 1991, forming the modern Russia that we know today. So here's a more detailed breakdown. Early history. The East Slavic origins. The history of Russia begins with the East Slavs who migrated to the region and from Eastern Europe. So the Eastern Slavs people originated from Eastern Europe, and then migrated a bit further, and then it just sort of began and started living there. And the Varangians and the Kievan Rus. In the 9th century or the hundreds, as you can say, the Varangians or the Scandinavians. Scandinavians are people that came from northern Europe, or specifically Scandinavia, which is basically just a peninsula, which consists of modern day Norway, Sweden, and Finland, and also Denmark, and Iceland, or basically northern Europe. So in the 9th century, the Varangians or the Scandinavians also came here with the East Slavs. So it created a Kievan Rus. This is not actually a Kievan Rus, it's just where they have settled. So the East Slavs, which came from Eastern Europe, and Scandinavians or the Varangians, which came from Northern Europe, sort of mixed together to form Kievan Rus. Wait, let me just, there we go. So here it established Kievan Rus, which resulted in the formation of or mixing of Eastern Europe and Northern Europe, or the Varangians. So Kiev became the center of a large state that stretched across Eastern Europe. Now we know how Kiev, which is the capital of Ukraine, well, it used to be sort of a place where it was the most important of Kievan Rus, because it's literally in the name. Also, now for the rise of Moscow. Following Mongol invasions in the 13th century, now fast forward to the 13th century, here came the Mongols from Asia, and they have stretched all across East Asia to about just a bit of Europe. They even reached up to Hungary until they got backed up a few years later, or few decades later. Now the Kievan Rus was attacked by the Mongols and forced to become their puppet. And so they have actually experienced the Mongolian Empire's invasion. So they sort of became a puppet, and also became a part of the Mongol Empire until it also collapsed. Now fast forward to the Tsardom and the Russian Empire. Now Moscow became the center of the Tsardom of Russia, which eventually expanded into vast Russian Empire. Now how did this from the 13th century become the Russian Empire? Well, that is actually a bit here. So here, if we just go more centuries ahead, or about the 18th century, or in the middle 18th or 19th century, Russia now was the center of Tsardom of Russia, which made it the Russian Empire. Let me just clear this up. Now the Russian Empire is basically Russia, is basically a Soviet Union, and but it's small, or its borders are pretty unique. It kind of looks like this in its peak. Now for the imperial period, or basically near the industrial revolution, or when it sort of became a monarch, the Russian Empire underwent significant expansion. So Russia actually just conquered Siberia a bit while back, even though it's very cold. Now, even though Siberia is very cold, hard for people to live, and also very barren, which means most crops will fail to grow, Russia took it anyway because it was free land. Because one, it was free land, and two, nobody wanted, so Russia just got it for extra land, which is one of the reasons why it's now the largest country in the world, because it conquered Siberia. There was no people there, well, almost no people, so it just took it. Since there were no one to stop them, and since no one didn't really care anyway, Russia took it. And now, so Russia took Siberia, which gained it a lot more land, and also took some land in Central Asia. So it sort of became like this with Siberia. Now for world wars. So Russia actually participated in both World War I and World War II. Now actually in 1917, the Bolsheviks led by Vladimir Lenin actually revolted against the Russian Empire due to their poverty, because they were actually poor during the war, and they were not as ahead as the other countries. For example, the United Kingdom and France, which were way ahead and were making a lot of new things, suppose grenades and tanks and a lot more artillery and weapons, while Russia was still stuck to or they were not so industrialized, so there were almost no factories there to create a lot of these products, because they were poor. So that's why the Bolsheviks revolted against them and successfully took over the entire empire and renamed it the Soviet Union after World War II. The borders changed a bit, or in the western part of Soviet Union, Poland was created. This was actually Poland back then. It was sort of like this, because some parts were controlled by Germany, and also this was Germany. So during the Great Depression, or when stocks went low and many were in poverty and many people had no jobs because they had no jobs, and so people started doing protests against the Great Depression. Or the Great Depression, or when things were a lot of expensive because the stocks were going very low, and so people were just freaking out because they had no jobs, they had no money, and so it was complete chaos. But then, and fast forward a bit, the USSR, or the Soviet Union, made a deal with Germany that they will actually divide Poland up after Germany conquered Austria and a bit of Czechia, or the Czech Republic, and it sort of became Nazi Germany. Led by Hitler, Adolf Hitler, which was one of the most brutal persons on the earth, which was the leader of Nazi Germany, and he believed in dictatorship, or a country ruled by one person only. So USSR made a deal with Germany to divide Poland up, and so they did, and they got a lot of land over it. USSR expanded a bit, but then World War II came, and after the annexation of Czechia or whole, or just occupied Czechia and left Slovakia. Back then it was actually called Czechoslovakia. Yeah, the name is very long, so it sort of made Slovakia a puppet state of Germany, and so they have declared war on Germany. Thus started World War II. So there was a lot of fights. Germany actually turned France into a puppet state and they renamed it Vicky France, and also took all of its area in Africa, or all of France's colonies in Africa and all around the world, and so there was complete chaos. But even the fall of France, and Great Britain did not surrender and continued fighting. But then Germany launched Operation Barbarossa on the USSR, which means they were literally just forced through the land and go through everything. And they actually knew that there were a lot of oil in the Caucasus, or the area where modern day Georgia, Armenia and Azerbaijan is. So they had to take control of that, so they took control of it to get more oil, and they were very close to Moscow. But then winter came. Winter was actually the savior of Soviet Union, because German troops had no proper clothing or proper materials to just bear the winter. So many troops died, and so it gave USSR some time to reinforce its soldiers and then defeat Germany. Germany was divided into 4 parts, and one of those parts was East Germany. It was actually just a division of West Germany, or Germany split into 2 parts, West Germany and East Germany. East Germany was in the communist side, or it was controlled by the USSR. There were a lot of countries and they were controlled by the USSR and also communism, and so they were basically on the side of USSR. But that side was very poor, because they had suffered a lot through the war and so had to build everything up, especially East Germany, because on West Germany they were very rich. They were richer than the communist side, and so they sort of just have left the USSR then. Oh, and also in 1991 USSR fell due to a lot of tensions, so many territories split up, and then it leads to the Russia that we know today, which is this. And Russia was actually friends with USA back then, but now they're not, because Russia was actually friendly and didn't pose any threat, and also their leaders had very nice relations with the USA. But eventually, when Russia started to become a threat, because they started supporting the enemies of USA, they started to get tensions. And then also Vladimir Putin came to become the president of Russia, and it leads to us today. So Russia has done a lot of things from Kiev and Rus to the Mongol invasions to Tsardom and Russian Empire, and also communism, and also the fall of Soviet Union, and now this modern Russia. Oh, and also another point, India and Russia have very close relations, because Vladimir Putin and Narendra Modi have some close relations, because when India was actually neutral during the Cold War, or you can also call it World War III, was actually the Cold War, India was neutral but still had very nice relations with the Soviet Union back then, and it still goes on to this day with Russia. So that's actually one side note. Russia and India have close relations, but India was also friends with USA, but USA got a little suspicious as India became friends with Russia. So that's all for this video. Bye.